Okay.
I guess I'll just say hi and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our lovely office. For those of you who've never been here before, you're probably shocked at how small RPA actually is. There's only about 28 full-time staff and a couple of interns, just for all that we do. So yeah, happy to host. Looking forward to today's conversation, and I'll actually just turn it over. I'm Tiffany. I just realized that Tiffany Ann Taylor, Vice President for Transportation at RPA, but I'll turn it over to W.
Thank you, and thanks again for hosting, and welcome everyone. This is our first Transportation, Mobility, and Open Space Advisory Group meeting. We have a few folks online, but we'll do introductions. But just big picture for today's meeting, we want to make sure everyone understands the engagement process and sort of what we're working towards as part of this vision plan. We want to review some initial key constraints and opportunities and get your feedback on those. And really the goal of this first meeting is to sort of understand the group's sort of initial priorities and concerns to inform the planning team and project team's work moving forward. Definitely expect in future meetings, we'll go over this in more detail, but in future meetings, getting more specific around spatial ideas as kind of the site planning and scenario planning moves forward. But today it will be a little bit more open-ended, a little bit more bigger picture. So we'll do some introductions, do sort of quick process overview, share some of the initial engagement and what we've heard to date, talk through some of the opportunities and constraints, which can also be sort of conversational and you can ask questions during that portion, and then leave a good chunk of the meeting for sort of facilitated discussion. So, any questions about the agenda or today's meeting? Okay, shift into introductions. And so we're going to ask folks to say their name, their organization and affiliation. I think it also has been helpful in meetings for folks just to talk a little bit about what your organization does or what you focus on as well, so people have a sense of who's in the room and what folks are working on. And then sort of when you think of opportunity in the context of BMT, sort of what's the first word that comes to mind? And Tiffany, I'd like to ask you to start, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I've done one and two. So for folks who aren't as familiar with RPA, we're a 102-year-old civic nonprofit focused on quality of life issues in the tri-state area, tri-state being New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. We do research and advocacy in three main areas: transportation, energy and environment, and then housing and community development. And about every 25 years, we put out a regional plan that is our guiding principle book, the last one being released in 2017. So when I think of opportunity in the context of this project, I think preservation of uses, and also sustainability. I think the opportunity to really upgrade and modernize a lot of the infrastructure that's there is an opportunity for New York City to continue to be a leader in some instances and do some things for the first time, perhaps that we're seeing comparatively in the rest of the region.
So I'm Nancy Webster with Brooklyn Bridge Park Conservancy, and the Conservancy works in close partnership with Brooklyn Bridge Park Corporation, who manage and operate the park. And we started out as advocates, very much in a process sort of like this one. It's kind of funny, right? Where the back in the 80s, the Port Authority had these piers that they wanted to get off their balance sheet, and they were proposing, an extensive amount of commercial development for them. And the surrounding community rose up and said, no, don't do that. Let's build a park instead. And we emerged as the leaders of that grassroots movement, if you will. And then with the success of that, we transformed our mission into supporting the park. And the principal way that we do that is by producing the lion's share of the park's free and low-cost public programming. So the sort of recreation, arts and culture, and environmental education. And we're very heavy into the environmental education space. So in one way, it's kind of wonderful. It's like looking back to, say, our origins in the 80s, a very similar sort of process. Although if I had an observation, it feels like the city, the port has learned a lot since the mid 1980s about public engagement with a process like this. Because, back in the 80s, it didn't start out this way, right? With this kind of input from folks. And so when we think of opportunities, right, we obviously think of Brooklyn Bridge Park being, sort of right on the edge of this. And very much concerned with, still feeling like the city has a dearth of open space, a dearth of park space. And I would say particularly, sort of in this area of Brooklyn, just nearly not enough, water access, right? Like so much of our waterfront has been behind a barbed wire fence. And so that's the perspective that we'll be looking at this with, but also the perspective of, the whole sort of BQE and the tangle of roadways that you find near Van Voorhees Park and Brooklyn Bridge Park Pier 6. And is there the opportunity to expand the scope a bit to really think about how to make that whole area much more pedestrian, user friendly, and like quality of life?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathy. I'm the working organizer of Transportation Alternatives. I will build on what Nancy was saying about expanding open space and pedestrian access. Transportation Alternatives is a 51-year-old advocacy organization that has been leading the movement for better walking, biking, and public transit in the 5 boroughs. And recently we have been more involved in city-wide transformational projects like the BQE, visioning the Cross Bronx processes led by DOT and also WXY as well. And also on the ground, we have campaigns that are grassroots, neighbor-led, like connecting and protecting Carroll Gardens to the larger network, the Brooklyn Cycling Network, the Red Hook Bus to Manhattan Coalition effort, that TA is a part of, and other local campaigns that also look at the space around the BMT to connect to and increase that access and safely increase that access. So as we reclaim streets for people, streets and space for people, we're also interested not only in the space of the BMT, but also all around the area, just like Nancy was saying, with connecting the surrounding area to all of the opportunities and great things that we want to do within the BMT.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Bernbach. I'm the Executive Director of the Brooklyn Heights Association. The Brooklyn Heights Association is, next year will be 115 years old. We're New York City's oldest civic association. And we, at this point in our existence, we focus on sort of, I would say, 3 main things. We do a lot of quality of life problem solving for folks who live in Brooklyn Heights, liaising with city agencies around sanitation and safety and all those kinds of, core micro neighborhood issues. We do a lot of community engagement. So we put on free community events for people in the neighborhood, like the Halloween parade on the promenade and the Easter egg hunt in the playground, and just those kind of fun community activities that bring people together. And then we also do advocacy around policy issues, both neighborhood-based and to a certain extent some citywide issues around transportation, public space, development, those kinds of things. So I think our reason for being in this room today has to do with our involvement in the conversation around reimagining the BQE. Obviously, Brooklyn Heights is not geographically part of the space that we're talking about for the city, but because the BQE is such an integral part of that section of the city and Brooklyn, and our hopes and dreams for seeing a better BQE in the future, and how whatever development is happening with the piers, has an impact on that and vice versa. We wanted to be involved in this conversation. So that's what we're doing here today, or what I'm doing here. I guess I would say the words, I think somebody, maybe Nancy, you said reclaim. I think reclaim was something that I mentioned, or that I was thinking about earlier, but I think it's more than just that. I think it's also, reclaiming and reimagining and reconnecting, as you were talking about. So all of those things, I think, are opportunities for us here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Brady. I lead the real estate and planning function for the Trust for Governor's Island. I will say I'm a substitute today. My colleague Chris will be at the following meetings, but he's out of the office. But for folks who don't know, Governor's Island is a 170-acre former military base for 200 years. The trust was created by the city to redevelop it and reconnect it back to the rest of the city for New Yorkers. So we built a beautiful park. We've revitalized the historic buildings, etc. I think probably the simplest way to summarize our relevance to this process is that we're a neighbor, that we're right across the channel. And everything that comes to Governor's Island comes on a boat because we don't have a bridge or anything else. A lot of that comes from right here, from Lower Manhattan, but a lot of it also comes from waterfront Brooklyn. It's our second biggest area of visitors to the island, coming as pedestrians, cyclists, etc. And then as the city has had the Blue Highway conversations about moving more things over water, that's an interest for us as well, where all of our, again, everything that comes to the island comes on a boat. We'd love to think about smart ways to reduce truck traffic on the island and consolidate things, think about EVs, do smarter projects like that, and there may be opportunities here to help support that goal.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Chris Rice, Associate Principal at WXY, supporting and working with EDC on this planning process. At WXY, sort of large-scale neighborhood planning and community-based planning initiatives, but also have supported a number of master planning efforts, including the Brooklyn Navy Yard Master Plan several years ago. And before we go on to you, Hunter, I'm actually going to ask the folks online to jump in here. So Kevin, can I ask you to go first? Oh, we can't hear you. We could hear you before. Okay. Maybe. There we go. Yes.
All right. Probably my headphones. Yeah. So Kevin Garcia, Senior Transportation Planner with the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. So NEJA is a organization for over 30 years. It's a citywide membership network of grassroots organizations that represent low-income communities of color in their fight for environmental justice. I think when I hear the word opportunity in the context of the BMT project, I think the first word that comes to mind is sustainability, but also resiliency. We're in the middle of a climate crisis, but I think this is an opportunity for the folks who live in that area and around it to really be prioritized when we're thinking about or creating a vision for this area. But knowing that, we need to fortify the infrastructure there so that it's resilient to, climate change as we're seeing more of these storms and now wildfires happening, very close by. Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. We'll go to Tiffany next.
Hi, good morning, guys. Sorry, my camera is off, busy running around. I'm Tiffany Davis, co-founder and executive director for the Red Hook Art Project. We are a local nonprofit who's been in Red Hook for the last 15 years. We provide free art, music, academic, and stress management support to the youth who live in and around the Red Hook waterfront. I'm here to listen, learn, and understand the opportunities and what's to come, and making sure that, Red Hook is at the table, and our youth and the young adults as they age out of these different programs in the neighborhood, that they have access to the different opportunities that is coming. And yeah, happy to be here.
Thanks, Tiffany. We'll go to Lorian next.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Lorian Farrell, Deputy Commissioner for the Bureau of Coastal Resilience within DEP at the City of New York. Our mission here is to think about our future relationship to the coast as a city for our entire coastline, specifically focusing on coastal storm surge, sea level rise, and tidal flooding. working really closely with our partners at DEP on a one water approach as well. So how do these interventions, how do we find opportunities to improve stormwater flooding as well as these other types of coastal threats that we have? And my word, still playing with it a little bit, but it's something to do with visionary. I feel that there's a lot of opportunities for finding co-benefits here, but I think someone also said modern approach to maritime activities and relationship to the community, but how do we also solve for the coastal threats at the same time as building just an amazing place that is vibrant and just exemplary for the city and for the world.
Thank you. We'll go to Sarah next.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Sarah Nielsen from New York City Parks in the Division of Environment and Planning. And my team works on resiliency projects and greenways and waterfronts. So this is hitting all of our buttons here. So I really appreciate being part of this conversation. Many of the things that folks have said are very much in line with what we want to do. And I think especially Commissioner Farrell's comments just now about really making sure that whatever the sort of resulting sort of public realm space is something that connects what's already there. We're very big fans of the Greenway along there. There's a lot of community gardens. As Nancy was saying, there's, fantastic parkland to the north of this area, many cool projects in the south in Red Hook. And so for parks, I think making sure that as to the extent we can make connections between and through all of those, and then that the resulting project has also additional outstanding parkland would be our goal. I think my word would be something about value add, because I think there's so many ways we can think about stormwater in parks. We can think about trees in parks. We can think about public space and sports, and like kind of layering shared benefits of different types of aspects of the project. So that's what we're excited about at Parks. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And Nate?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nate Gray. I'm a Senior Vice President in the Neighborhood Strategies Department at the Economic Development Corporation. I'm working with WXY and the EDC team on the engagement, as well as on the planning effort. I guess when I think of opportunity, I think about how do we future-proof this? How do we respond to climate change? How do we think about jobs in the future? How do we think about cutting-edge ways to integrate industry, community together, such that this is a place that's additive? Not to say that it's not now, but to be able to really focus on those co-benefits that we possibly could have from this place.
Thanks, Nate. And Matthias?
Hi, everyone. I'm downstairs and about to go up, but good timing for a remote introduction. My name is Matthias Caldwell, originally from Buenos Aires in New York since 2015, and a member of the Red Hook community since 2018. I've lived there and currently own a business there. And I'm here as a member of the Red Hook Bus to Manhattan Coalition, which is advocating for a direct bus from Red Hook, where the battery tunnel is, to Manhattan. I am also a member of the Red Hook Business Alliance and a co-founder of Friends of Port Defiance, which is an organization fiscally sponsored by the Open Space Institute. And we're advocating for rewilding and green infrastructure approaches to resiliency in Red Hook. The word that comes to mind, I'm also gonna offer a hyphenated word, which is multi-solving. I think this is a great opportunity to solve many of the challenges and environmental burdens that not only have existed for a long time, but have been accelerated over the last few years in Red Hook. And I look forward to the opportunity with working with you all on envisioning and advancing those plans. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, Hunter.
Hey, good to see all of you all. I'm Hunter Armstrong, Executive Director
of Brooklyn Greenway Initiative and co-chair of the New York City Greenways Coalition. Definitely exciting to be here. I think our organization, Brooklyn Greenway Initiative, really had its origins in the 90s, kind of on Columbia Street in response to possibly Brooklyn Marine Terminal issues. So, I think I missed the prompt, but I think I picked up on what we're talking about. I'm very interested in making sure that the Greenway, the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway, is, first of all, I would say like protected at least through this process, and ideally expanded and improved and expanded possibly to accommodate some of the different types of micromobility, commercial micromobility, which might be envisioned for Brooklyn Marine Terminal. So that's something I also mentioned is we recently did completed a research project with the Regional Plan Association with Tiffany Ann's colleagues on usership along the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway. So we have pretty interesting information about how people are using this section of the Greenway, which I'm happy to share at a future meeting. So the word I would envision is access, just, better public access to the site, better safe access along the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway and connections to nearby neighborhoods.
Hi, I'm Danielle Zuckerman, Director of Government Affairs at New York City Department of Transportation. At DOT, we provide for the safe and efficient movement of people and goods. So I think a word that applies to this corridor in particular is balance. There are a lot of important uses that rely on this corridor to get where they need to go and get people the things they need to have. And I've worked on the BQE for probably my entire government career at this point, and I've worked with many of the people in this room for a long time, and I hope that we can build on the conversations we've had over the years.
Hi folks, my name is Daniel Abram. I'm the Director of Policy and Programs at New Yorkers for Parks. Thanks for having me. Obviously the organization would love to see a park because we're New Yorkers for Parks. But of course that is something that makes sense, right? And I think the word that I would use for this is probably progressive, something that, obviously a park is great, but to Andre's point and your point as well, Danielle, the need for mobility and kind of last mile buildings or such and just really recognizing that the community itself is probably in need of some kind of industrial port as well. So a park, but also hoping to see anything new. So really excited to chat with you all today on this.
Hi everyone, I'm Tali. I'm a project manager in neighborhood strategies with the Economic Development Corporation. The word that comes to mind for me, the word that comes to mind for me is innovation. It seems like it's a great opportunity to try new things, blue highways that New York City hasn't even seen before. So yeah, it seems like a really exciting opportunity to have some innovative solutions to climate change and some of the other problems that people highlighted. Nice to meet you all.
Hi everybody, I'm Betsy Daniel in the Neighborhood Strategies team, working with Kelly and me at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. I'm Assistant Vice President, and the word that comes to mind is multi-layered. I think things can do like many things at once, and we're not creating things in isolation, but how do you bring it all together?
Great, great, thank you everyone.
Mallory.
Oh, sorry. I'm Mallory. I'm sorry. We spend so much time together that I'm just sorry. We want to hear Mallory. I'm so sorry.
Yes, I am a planner at WXY. I just joined the team actually about a month ago, so I'm really excited to have these conversations with you all and learning a lot from these groups. The word I would use is similar to what Betsy said, but integration, about connecting all of these groups together, but also the community and the conversations we've heard, what's on the site. There's a lot of really great opportunities. And I'll also just say this is Matthias.
Yeah, just to connect voice and video. Hi, everyone.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Just quickly, some guidelines for productive dialogue. We want to make sure that everyone's contributing. So take space and make space. So if you're speaking for a while, make space for others to speak. We want to encourage you to share from your own experience and use I statements and avoid generalizations. This is a really complex site and project, so we want you all to act as collaborators and not spectators. And again, this idea of, why am I talking or why aren't I talking? Just making sure that there's space for everyone to contribute. This is a larger group, so we just want to make sure we're hearing from a variety of voices. So just asking everyone to be mindful. Going to move into some project context. I'll move sort of quickly so we can get to some of the discussion and site opportunities and constraints. But restating the project goals, I think it's important here to sort of level set. The city put these goals forward as sort of like a framework for the community to work within. They want to support a clean and modern maritime port that creates jobs and industry and growth, reduce emissions across operations and related activity, create a new mixed-use residential development for the community, invest in neighborhood opportunities and create open space and waterfront access, integrate environmental justice by addressing current and historic environmental inequities, complement and connect with the surrounding communities and neighborhoods, protect the site against increasing threats from climate change, improve mobility and mitigation traffic disruption, and support the long-term financial sustainability of the site. And I will just say in other meetings, a lot of folks have said, that's a lot of goals. That's a lot of competing interest. And I think that's part of what we'll want to get into as part of these advisory group conversations. I think you all are very familiar with the site, but just to level set again, the site runs from Pier 7 up north, which abuts Brooklyn Bridge Park, as Nancy pointed out, includes the Red Hook Container Terminal on Pier 10, and runs to the south, including the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal at Pier 12. Many of you are probably aware, but the project timeline was extended several weeks ago. It was originally slated to end of 2024, but was extended to March 2025. And we just wanted to highlight what we see as sort of gains from that extension. Obviously, more time for planning and engagement. We've added additional public workshops, which I'll talk through in more detail. We got a lot of feedback on the initial open house style of the first public workshop. So we're planning for varied workshop styles moving forward, including presentations, opportunities for Q&A, small group discussion, and small work sessions. There's an additional task force meeting planned. Also, we've already observed early in our engagement, we haven't seen a lot of direct engagement from Red Hook residents, from Black residents and Latino residents and non-English speaking communities. And so we're already starting to develop a strategy to reach those groups moving forward. And we just wanted it to be clear that there's a real clear integration of both the planning and engagement teams. There are two separate scopes of work. There's the Borough Happold scope and the WXY sort of planning and engagement scope, but we're essentially acting as one team. We're coordinating weekly, if not daily. And so it's really one sort of core project team. This is the updated project timeline, and this deck will be made available to everyone following the meeting. We anticipate the next public workshop to be announced very shortly. And we expect that to take place in sort of early and mid-December that focus on opportunities and constraints. We imagine another set of public workshops in January, getting more into site-specific ideas and sort of spatial planning and site planning. And then in February, presenting a sort of draft set of scenarios to the public for their review. The task force has been meeting since September and will continue to meet on a monthly cadence. Our next task force meeting is tomorrow afternoon. We'll be focusing on sort of opportunities and constraints and land uses. From there, we'll move into site-specific actions and towards scenarios. And I think just one thing to highlight about the task force meetings is that we are sort of starting big picture with big ideas and sort of opportunities and constraints, and then we'll be moving to sort of more refined ideas, right? So we'll be moving to site planning, then we'll be moving to scenarios, then we'll be moving to a preferred site plan. So there's no big reveal of ideas at the end. It's all sort of having everything on the table, sort of big picture, and moving towards refinement as we move through the process and towards March 2025. And then you see the advisory groups sort of there at the bottom. This is our first round of advisory groups. We've completed, this is our 5th out of 6 for this round. We have our NYCHA Youth Advisory Group tomorrow. I will say that the timing of the advisory groups might shift. We want to make sure that the next time we convene, we have some real specific information for you to respond to. So there is a possibility that that second round may shift into early January, that we have to discuss that with EEC and others. Okay, yes, go ahead.
While we're on process, and something that I've been unclear on.
Yes.
So the final work product, if you will,
yes,
is going to be a vision plan.
That is correct.
And sort of more specifically, what does that mean? Does that mean like a general project plan that is ready to sort of roll into EIS, or is it, a loftier document that then other work needs to be done around to flesh it out? I know the project's not going through ULURP. It's a GPP process, right? Which is a state process. So how does the vision plan, what does that really mean?
So the vision plan, I think at its core is a specific site plan that has the distribution of land uses, of various land uses that are proposed for the site, and specifics related to those. So if housing is proposed, it would include the density of certain housing sites, or if there's going to be parks and open space, the location and size of that open space. So it will be a fairly specific vision plan that has those land uses and sort of a spatial constraints related to those, whether it's the density or the size of things. And so the idea and what we've discussed with the task force is producing something more specific so that when it goes through GPP, there's not a lot of potential for things to move around, but that the site is fairly defined by the time we get to this vision plan in March 2025.
Right. So it's a fairly detailed.
That's correct.
Document.
That's right. That's right. It would also include if other additional recommendations come up as part of the planning process that the task force wants to put forward, those would also be included as well. Some early things that have come up is like, what are the other capital needs that may be related to the site or outside of the site? Like those are types of things that we might also consider with the task force and be included in the vision plan.
Okay, and then that will roll into a GPP process, which will take another,
let's say, a year.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's right. So the task force is led by a set of task force leadership, which includes Congressman Dan Goldman, Vice Chair Councilmember Alexa Viles, and Vice Chair State Senator Andrew Gunarves. Their role is really to sort of guide the process, approve the planning priorities, and shape the vision plan as it moves forward. And just as Nancy was asking, the task force does have sort of formal voting power, so they will approve the final site plan. And so I think that's an important difference from other city processes where the city sort of says, this is the final plan, but really the task force is approving this vision plan at the end through a vote. Just to focus on the advisory groups really quickly, obviously we're asking you to attend, review materials, join as active participants. And really, this is an opportunity to provide feedback on the planning framework and the vision plan as it develops, really from your specific perspective. We're also hoping that you'll communicate about the engagement process and opportunities to be so that we have a robust engagement process. I think one thing that's specific to the AGs that I want to call out, we're not expecting folks here to come to consensus. We're not expecting recommendations to come out of these AG meetings, given that we're only meeting 3 times over the next 4 or 5 months. And so it's really what we'll do is collect the feedback we're hearing here, synthesize it, share it with all the AGs, share it with the project team, and most specifically, or most importantly, share it with the task force so it can inform their thinking as they're making decisions. Did you have a question?
You may have just answered my question, but I was wondering if there's opportunity for advisory groups to kind of collaborate. I'm just thinking about, in particular, I've been thinking about the EJ Climate Resilience and Waterfront Group, which seems like I'm interested, like we all want to be on the same page. I think probably that group and our group are in theory sort of working towards the same.
That's a great question that has come up. So we're not creating a formal opportunity for all the AGs to come together. That's upwards of 60, 70 groups. And so what we have sort of thought through as a strategy is, one, we're making all the notes available from these meetings with everyone. So if you want to look at the workforce group or the maritime group, you can do that. We're also encouraging the chairs to coordinate as another sort of mechanism potentially to sort of make sure that there's cross-pollination. Obviously, so many of the ideas we're talking about intersect with one another. And then lastly, we've already heard from some advisory groups that they may organize on their own outside of these 3 meetings. And so if folks want to meet or have additional discussions, we're just trying to be mindful that this is a volunteer ask. And so we don't want to, and it's not paid. And so we don't want to burden folks.
Sorry, I don't want to bog too down in process, but just a question about the task force. You mentioned that at the end of the day, the task force will vote on the plan.
That is right.
So a couple questions there. Does that mean that, is it just the chairs that actually?
The full task force votes.
And then, so is it like majority rules or?
2/3. Yeah.
2/3.
It's a 2. Yeah. So we can, there's a process guide that has protocols for voting on the site plan. And so it includes protocols on quorum.
Or in that, another document in that folder that was shared.
Oh, okay,
We just
okay.
didn't.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And then I guess so the assumption is that moving into the point of actually taking a vote, it's pretty clear how people are voting and what's going to happen. But is there a mechanism for if for some reason if the
Yes.
plan fails? Like,
Yes.
I'm not.
No.
Totally
That is, this is
figure out how it goes.
absolutely, this is a super complex project, and I think building consensus will be challenging.
Yeah.
And so I think we've built this into the process of like having everything on the table early, so
Right.
folks, so the tension points are very clear, and we can sort of try to work towards consensus. What we've outlined and can share more detail on this is a set of protocols around if folks don't agree with certain aspects of the project, they can actually state that as a part of the vision plan. So you could say, okay, my organization, we agreed with everything except for 2 or 3 things, and sort of name that within the vision plan document as a sort of lever for folks to express, to just show that they weren't fully supportive and call out what they did not support. So that's one mechanism. Again, I think moving towards consensus will be a challenge, and we'll sort of deal with that as we move through the process.
Thanks.
This just outlines sort of, I'm going to move through this sort of quickly, but high level again, today will be sort of focused on bigger picture, understanding the big picture constraints and opportunities and what your priorities are and concerns are to inform the planning team. We anticipate that in meeting 2, we'll have some more site specific information to respond to, which is again why we might shift it just a little bit. And then by AG meeting 3, we expect to have either scenarios or a preferred site plan for you all to directly feedback into, so we can take that into the task force. So we'll kind of be starting bigger picture and then getting more specific as we move through the process. And then this I'm going to talk through very quickly, which is just how we envision the public workshops moving forward. We see public workshop 2 being focused on opportunities and constraints, introducing case studies, acknowledging and integrating past planning efforts, and potentially talking about some potential land uses. At workshop 3, we actually plan to have a 2-scale model of the site that folks can actually use to plug and play different potential land uses. And the real focus of that is to understand the trade-offs. If you have housing, if this task force wants to propose housing, what does that mean? What kind of density gets you more affordable housing? If you have parks and open space, what does that mean for the port operation? So we really want folks to engage meaningfully with the trade-offs of different uses on the site. And we see a model as a tool to be able to sort of engage that conversation. And then workshop 4 would be, we would have a set of final scenarios that we'd present to the public, as well as any draft recommendations that may be coming out of the process. And community members would have the opportunity to sort of provide direct feedback and prioritize those scenarios and recommendations. This is just a snapshot from the Mikio Center from our first workshop back in September. This is really just to highlight that we see workshop 2 as a sort of larger central presentation and then small group discussion. This is an example, please don't be thrown off by the model that we're showing here. The tool and the exercise we'll be building is specific to the site. It's a 2-scale model of the port itself and would have port-related pieces. This is just an example from other engagement we've conducted. And then workshop 4, we have those final scenarios where folks would actually really engage with them directly and prioritize and provide feedback. Okay, any questions? I know it's a lot of process, but I think it's good to level set. Just to quickly touch on the engagement to date, we've reached over 1,800 community members, 450 as a part of the virtual information session, almost 300 folks across the 2 public workshops, and we had an initial community survey where we reached over 800 folks. We've had tabling events ongoing. This doesn't include the recent tabling events at Red Hook Art Project that we've been conducting as feedback sessions as well. So we'll be producing a public engagement summary that highlights everything that we've heard to date and who we've reached. Pictures from the Mikio Center in September, and this repeat of that on Monday, October 7th. And now I'm just going to talk through just some of the emerging themes that we've heard. Again, we want to reach a wider and more diverse range of voices from the community, but this is sort of what we're hearing to date. So a lot of enthusiasm for park space, recreational amenities and waterfront access, definitely concern over industrial air pollution, the need for flood protection, just resiliency in general. There's a strong interest in increasing public transit options, and a wide range of things have come up: ferries, bus rapid transit, shuttles, obviously improving bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Given the sort of BQE sort of ongoing work, there's a lot of anxiety around sort of any new traffic generation and sort of just, the street network being overburdened as is. As it relates to housing and affordable housing, there's been a lot of opposition to, or a lot of concern around luxury high rises and luxury towers. But generally, there has been support for affordable housing, and a lot of folks have called out the need for increased NYCHA funding as well. We see that there's a sort of a tension between wanting to preserve the working waterfront, but how those uses will interact with residents if housing were to be proposed. A desire to maintain small business, to support small business and local businesses in the area. Definitely some concerns over the cruise industry, but I think that's mostly been focused on the impact of traffic that it has.
And pollution.
And pollution. And job training, definitely an interest in sort of educational programming that supports, maritime training, jobs and careers related to resiliency and sustainability as well, with a desire to want to focus and prioritize local residents for new employment opportunities. Okay, so I'll just pause there to see if there are any initial questions. Okay. And I know we're at 10:45 now. I think if folks have questions that come up during the site opportunities and constraints, we should definitely make space for that. So we want this to be conversational. It doesn't just need to be a presentation. I would also say we've received a lot of critical feedback on these site opportunities and constraint slides. And so we, moving forward, we want these to be, excuse me, clarifying, not confusing. Excuse me. And so we'll want to, it's very much our intention to continue to update these and refine them as we move forward. So we won't be sort of taking this deck to the public workshop. That we want to build and refine the content that we're sharing so that it's clear for folks. Before I jump into this, I just want to say, folks online, we can't see you. So if you have questions, just feel free to chime in and we can pause as well. Okay, so just some site context here. So today the site, contains a lot of non-maritime uses, and there are significant site investments that need to be made to bring the sort of full site back to its capacity. On the map here, we're showing the non-maritime uses and the sort of red hatch. This includes Piers 9A and 9B, which we've gotten a lot of critical feedback on. So many folks have called out that if the Port Authority had made the proper investments into 9A and 9B and sort of kept the site up, that those actually would be maritime use. So I just want to call that out. The MARSEC zone is a sort of security zone related to the container terminal. I think one thing that's already come up in early conversation is that the MARSEC zone can shift, right? That is a security zone specific to sort of international containers coming into the site, needing to be checked, but you could have other industrial uses that don't require the sort of MARSEC zone level of security that we see. So that boundary that's outlined in white could shift if the land uses shift. But I think it's worth calling out, obviously the site is very large, it's 122 acres. And so this idea of multi-uses or balance on the site, I think is certainly important to think about and consider. So Piers 9A and 9B, they're currently too deteriorated to be safe for use. They were condemned in September of 2023. Many of you are probably aware that EDC won a $164 million mega grant to reconfigure that area into a marginal pier, which has more utility in general. And so this is the site that's been identified for potential reconfiguration. The design, the exact design of that marginal pier has not been finalized. But in terms of things that are fixed versus not fixed, the marginal pier is a fixed component that we expect to come into play at BMT.
And sorry, just to clarify, because I've heard this before and it was very informative, that means that the vision for a green port will most likely happen there after reconfiguration, or?
I don't think that's set. I don't think the land uses there are set. I mean, I think having a marginal pier there, maybe suggests that there'll be industrial uses there, but sort of specifically what would be on that new marginal pier has not been set. I don't know, EDC can. free to jump in.
I
Yes.
guess also follow up, the picture there that you have of the sand and the use there, is that just meant to illustrate that, like what a marginal pier looks like, or is that suggesting some future use, or?
It's not suggesting a
Okay.
future use, just more just a marginal pier that runs perpendicular to the shore. Yeah, similar to pier 12, there, pier 10 as well.
I had a question, given that it seems like a lot of this process is being driven by federal grants, and I'm assuming that there are more hopes for federal grants in the hopper. Is the change in administration a concern about, the spigot getting cut off?
That's a great question. My understanding is that the $164 million mega grant won't be impacted by the new administration. I think sort of future funding opportunities we anticipate those being fewer, just given where the administration is headed. But I don't know if EDC wants to.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I think there's still one active grant that we're still waiting for, but any future grants, maybe not likely, or we don't know that.
Okay, just a few other constraints. The Hugh Carey Tunnel runs, I think the planning team is working to understand exactly where the Hugh Carey Tunnel runs under the site, but our understanding right now is that it runs through Pier 10 of the container terminal, which could have impacts on sort of potential future land uses or dredging that may be needed, which obviously relates to sort of cost as well. Also, just highlighting the yellow hatch on some of the piers, which is the construction load limitations. And our sort of current understanding is that since those are piers over water, it sort of restricts or could potentially restrict what is built on those sites. And so those are some of the key constraints. I think the current understanding is that Pier 7 and 9 can't hold sizable foundations. But again, this is early sort of planning analysis. And so we'll continue to refine and update this as we move through the planning process. I will just flag that there's this note here about certain vessels not being able to cross and access the northern piers. We've definitely got some feedback and questions around that and hope to clarify that. Folks have said that they've seen large vessels sort of move across the northern side of the site, and so I'm going to confirm that.
Can you just point out one more time which are Pier 7 and which are 7, 8,
Yeah.
and 9?
Yeah, so this is Pier 7,
Okay.
Pier 8, 9A,
Thank you.
and then 9. Yeah, of course. Thank
Oh,
you for,
so when you say 7 to 9, it's all 4 of those.
yes, exactly.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And still on that, when you say that it can take significant foundations, sizable foundations, does that mean on the pier area that goes into the water, or is that applicable to the sort of like the full back of the?
That's a great question.
Of the lot.
My understanding is that it's just the pier areas that are over the water, but that the uplands could potentially hold more. And the uplands, yes, the uplands are these adjacent parts to the pier. Okay, calling out some of the site opportunities. BMT has the potential to be planned not just for today's maritime industries, but I think there's a big focus on being forward thinking and future proofing. It's a really large site. And so I think some of the early thinking from the project team is how do we actually start to plan for and create flexibility for future industries, whether that's new waterside industries or thinking about a mixed use port. Obviously the Blue Highway initiative has come up a lot. And so, yeah, I think flexibility of the site is something that the planning team is sort of looking at early on. Another sort of potential opportunity is that BMT can increase jobs and accelerate the local economy while also potentially routing truck traffic off neighborhood streets and onto waterways as blue highways. Obviously, truck traffic has come up a lot in the community. I think there's a desire and at the planning team potentially looking at bringing trucks off the neighborhood grid and into the site potentially as well. And then again, the city looking at the BMT as a potential site for its Blue Highway initiative, which is all about moving goods on the waterways. How can we have goods come in on barge, go out by barge, potentially up to Hunts Point or into the neighborhood on using sort of micro distribution, whether that's bike cargo, electric trucks. And so I think that's going to be a big focus of this moving forward.
Chris, I have a question about this.
Yeah.
How Does the potential internal route idea work with the MARSAC designation?
That's a good question. I don't think we're there yet in terms of the planning, but I think that's a great question.
So-
Internal route.
Yeah, so the green dotted line, the idea is that instead of having trucks on local streets, couldn't you just have them be on the property and stay on? So I'm assuming right now the idea is that on paper, because it's one piece of property, you could do a route, but maybe technically, if there's a designated security issue, that might not be possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the MARSIC zone can change, and so
Mhm.
there's probably a possibility to configure the MARSIC zone in a way where you can avoid that sort of security zone. But again, I think we're so early that's hard to answer. I think that's a great point.
Another part about that, do you think that the project team can let us know how difficult it actually is to change a MARSAC designation? Because my inclination is that that is not an easy thing. And then it's federal level and we're about to have a federal administration. So I kind of like the idea of moving it, right, and keeping it flexible, but if it's something that's not real, then we should probably not talk about it.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah, that's come up sort of like what are the regulations related to changing the MARSIC zone? I think that's something we need to understand more. Definitely, so we bring that to the planning team. And I think that's a great reminder to highlight that we have every intention to have the planning team join the second and third meeting so we can hear directly from them as well.
Does the city or DOT or those who are involved in the Blue Highways project, do you have an estimate yet of if Blue Highways was built to like our wildest dreams, like full capacity, how much reduction, like what that would mean in terms of reduction of trucks on the streets? Is there, it's a projection or a guess, but is anyone like?
I don't know if it's been quantified. It probably depends on the nature of exactly how it's rolled out.
Is there a hope or an estimate? Is it like, are we talking like it's 10%, it's 30%, it's 100%? Like, no, nothing like that yet.
If someone might have that, I don't know that.
Okay.
If it helps, a barge can carry 20 containers. A barge of the type that's being looked at, there's a variety of them, but an example for reference that I've heard is that a barge can carry 20 containers. So that's 20 trucks of the road for a barge.
I think it'll depend also on like which kind of vehicles would go into a site and leave the site. So are those cargo bikes, are those trucks? So I think that kind of influences the impact on truck traffic.
Okay, thanks.
And my understanding is the planning team is looking at trying to quantify sort of like if there were a Blue Highway site here, how large would it be? What would the impact be on how many goods are moved, how many trucks are removed off the street? I know there's a desire to understand that.
Yeah, okay.
Deeply. So this is sort of speaking to new housing, both gain and loss. So nearby neighborhoods have seen some new housing and some small declines in housing. Rent burden in this area is at 35%. While that is still high, it's lower than the citywide rent burden of 43%. And so I think this is a slide that needs to be refined so we can understand exactly what the catchment area is that we're sort of talking about. We've also got some comments and feedback about including plan development and understanding any new housing that's coming online as well.
Can I ask a question about the rent burden? I'm not a housing expert, but does that basically mean this area is wealthier than maybe other parts of New York City, or that rent is lower? Am I looking at that correctly?
Yeah, I think a clarifying point that we need to understand about this data is if the public housing is being included, because folks have called out that if rental houses is being included in this rent burden in the area, that it could skew the overall numbers.
Right.
And so that's something we need to clarify.
Okay.
Okay.
I think could you go back to that? Could you go back to the other slide?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that it's something about the topography here might also help show what is happening. Just I feel like it would help tell the story better, where the top of the hill versus where it kind of flattens out. For some reason, that seems like a big piece of understanding the uses, the rental, the housing in this vicinity. Does that make sense?
Can you say more about that?
I think I'm just thinking about kind of psychological barriers between where the Gowanus is and the waterfront. And
Mhm.
maybe by then it has flattened out enough. But to me, it feels like you're still kind of going over a hill, right? Maybe that's just my own uh, topographical challenge. But I'm just thinking that maybe a topo line or two along
Yeah,
the 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 grayed out area might be interesting to help share the story.
got it. Got it.
Thought. Carry on.
Yeah. No, thank you. Okay, so obviously resiliency will be a big focus of this work, and thinking about how BMT can actually help protect against storm surge and other climate impacts. As you can see here, the entire site, it was within the floodplain, and I know from talking to tenants on the site that it was impacted heavily by Hurricane Sandy. And so I think it's worth noting that the city is coordinating with the city on the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project, and sort of thinking about resiliency and what that means for the site and how it interconnects to the surrounding communities will be sort of a key aspect of this moving forward.
I have another question. With the area that was not inundated, is that kind of referring to what Sarah just said? Is that that exactly where your arrow is? Is that a higher elevation?
Yeah, I think this is something I want to clarify with the planning team, but I assume that this area, for whatever reason, is just at a higher elevation, and so I didn't see as much flooding.
It's both more elevated, but also you have an underground historic water paths. In fact, what you're seeing there looks very similar to what Red Hook looked like in the 1700s.
And
Cypress Tree.
Maddie's Van Brunt, is that going through part of the non-inundated? I'm just trying to sort of like orient myself to that.
Yeah, you probably heard that historically there was a path going through a marsh that ended in Red Hook in an elevated area. And it was very interesting to see that stood up in terms of flooding during Sandy.
One thing to note, and we hope to have more information on this, is that the city learned that BMT built its own private sewer system to deal with stormwater on site. And they're currently, the planning team is currently mapping the sewer system now to understand it more deeply. But our understanding is that stormwater drains into the East River, but that the sewage connection does connect into DEP's combined sewer sort of system.
But there's CSOs in this area that we're looking at.
We need to map that.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to map that. So yeah, they're currently looking at that. We hope to have more information by the next meeting. There's a hope that BMT can increase and enhance public waterfront access, provide new greenway connections, bring people to the water, and address environmental injustices. Public waterfront access has been a major theme that's come out of the public engagement. And so I think, again, when we think about sort of balance and potential future land uses, striking that balance will be a really big, important part of the planning work.
Yeah, and again, just to sort of reiterate the obvious point, right, is the way that the BQE runs through, Cobble Hill and Carroll Gardens, and then like scoots around Red Hook, just sort of create significant pedestrian access, like down to the summit.
Absolutely.
It's like a moat, essentially, around the site.
Right. Yes, folks, there's been a lot of conversation already around sort of specifically the MARSEC zone. How does that shift? What are the opportunities to create more direct waterfront access? What uses can actually support and work well with waterfront access and green space in general? So I think that's going to be something that we focus on moving forward.
But I mean, the interesting thing is, that the BQE, that moat, the trench, if you will, is basically outside of this project boundary, but its existence, I think, has, sort of outsized impact, especially if you're talking about housing, of how well that works and integrates with surrounding communities.
Right. And then lastly, just before we open it up to sort of full discussion, I think there's a hope that the site can really center belonging and accessibility. and meet the needs of both the local community and some of the citywide need as well. I think, again, this for the early thinking in the planning team is sort of, it's a large site. And so it spans 3 or 4 different distinct neighborhoods. And so how can we think about balance and flexibility and meeting multiple needs, as many have sort of called out as we began this conversation. So again, this is just sort of general initial opportunities and constraints, but I think we'll continue to have more and more specific spatial information to share as we move through the process. Oh, any initial questions on that? Okay. Yeah, is someone online? No, okay. Great. I think with that, we want to turn it over to sort of full discussion, utilizing some of the discussion questions we worked on with Tiffany. So Tiffany, I don't know if you want to kick us off or happy to support.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's just go ahead and dig into the first one if the other ones come up, by all means. So, Chris explained earlier that really we're providing thoughtful feedback, especially given the lenses that we're all coming to this project with. And so what additional key questions do we want the planning team to consider? Or maybe paired with that, so you shared earlier, what's your organization's primary focus or initial area of interest? I guess based on the introductions we had earlier, and now hearing the potential challenges and opportunities, are there aspects of this that you think perhaps are missing, or that should really be emphasized as part of the planning process?
I spoke a lot, but since there's some silence, I'm just gonna go for it. So we're in the advisory group for transportation, mobility, open space. And for me, in regards to mobility, it's hard to create any type of assessment or recommendation at this stage, since good mobility decisions exist downstream from good land use decisions. So the first thing that comes to mind, since open space has been a large point of agreement, of a priority, and with that consideration with regards to mobility, we understand that there's going to be industrial uses. There's a variety of options for that. So my question has a couple of parts. One is in regards to open space, has there been areas prioritized for that? Understanding that there are no large open spaces in Red Hook that are green. There's actually a lot of open space that has somewhat recently been covered with AstroTurf to avoid remediation. So we have a Valentino, or Tiny Valentino, over there. And I think there's an interesting opportunity to connect it to Brooklyn Bridge Park at the other end of the site. But yeah, I'm curious, with obviously MarTech movement is hard. Brooklyn Cruise Port is probably hard as well in terms of movement. So the question is, has there been areas eyed for open space? And similarly, are there constraints when people think about housing of where that would be possible?
Yeah, I think just to quickly respond, just to speak to some of the things that have come up in conversation. I mean, obviously with Brooklyn Bridge Park here, right adjacent to Pier 7, a lot of folks have sort of said, oh, naturally, wouldn't you extend Brooklyn Bridge Park onto some of those piers? I'm not saying that that's an idea that anyone's moving forward with, but that's definitely been raised as a suggestion. And I think just to really sort of recapture your other point, you're saying that sort of, from an equity perspective, providing more green space in Red Hook in particular is something that you kind of want to elevate as part of the conversation and planning process.
Yeah. Was that the answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, basically there's a lack of green space in Red Hook, and it's an area that's been overburdened environmentally And I think in the same way that a lot of green space in Brooklyn Bridge Park is already there and it's a natural extension, I think that can coexist with a more addressing a lack of green space and concerns with resiliency in Red Hook would make sense as well. And obviously, I think connecting both would be really wonderful. Many considerations how that could happen. Obviously, bikes and transit would be really important to play a part there. But as I was saying at the beginning of my comment, really transit, mobility, traffic decisions can't be envisioned without good land use decisions, right? At least that's how I think about it.
Is yours in response to? Okay, yeah, and then we'll go to Kevin, who's raised his hand. No, go ahead. Are you sure? Okay, Kevin, you want to chime in here?
Yeah, and thank you so much for this presentation, and Tiffany, thank you for hosting and for facilitating this conversation. Echoing what Matthias said, yeah, definitely would love to see more green space. Want to see the task force really consider that. Additionally, more trees in the area. Red Hook, I know from a couple walking tours, I've seen that like just the amount of trees is just abysmal. Like it's almost non-existent. But I think one of the things that I would love to see the task force really consider is the installation of public charging infrastructure for cars and for bikes in the area. We have seen this proliferation of e-commerce, mega and last mile warehouses in the surrounding area, and we also have climate mandates that we have to meet at the state level. But I think, these e-commerce warehouses are bringing hundreds or thousands of truck trips per day to the neighborhood and surrounding area. So I think really thinking about like where can these charging stations be installed? What are the power lines or, the infrastructure that's needed in order to power them? How is that going to be built out and incorporated? And then also thinking about where are the existing last mile and e-commerce warehouses, but also where are some of the soft sites for potential future ones, as we're waiting for the city to adopt the special permit process for last mile warehouses in the near future, because like there will be more. Like we know that e-commerce online shopping is on the rise, so we suspect that there will be more of these facilities. But yeah, if there could be additional charging stations that are public for vans, cars, trucks, and bikes as well, so that we're really moving towards reducing emissions, tailpipe emissions, but also reducing vehicle miles traveled. Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin.
I hope you're wrong, Kevin. I hope there's not more. In Red Hook.
I'm on the same page as you, but
Okay, I heard you say the opposite. That's fine.
Okay, yeah, so a couple things. I want to echo what Matthias and Kevin are saying, but not to beat a dead horse, but just so that this gets filtered up to the task force level, that it does, and I'm echoing what Amy Breedlove from the Cobble Hill Association said in the Housing and Community Development Task Force last week, that it does seem like the geography of the site is such that, maybe if you can show the very last slide, yeah, like since this is the MARSEC zone currently, right, we have the container port, the MARSEC zone, and the cruise terminal. The kind of easy thing, it seems, would be to put all the green space and open space over here and retain this for the kind of industrial and maritime uses, which is really fundamentally inequitable. So I think I just want to emphasize the point that's being made that, sure, potentially expanding the current footprint of Brooklyn Bridge Park is, makes sense in a certain context, but I think it's really important to consider, not reinforcing the current segregation that already exists on the site.
Mm.
I guess I also want to understand Tiffany's point about what really are the constraints? Like, is the reality of moving the MARSEC zone possible? Because if it's not, then that really has a huge impact on how we can distribute the uses of the site. So understanding some of these constraints around the current maritime and non-maritime uses and what is actually on the table as something we can change and what is absolutely not on the table. You know, it doesn't make sense to go down a fantasy road of like, we can have this, this, and this. And it's like, no, actually, you can't have any of that. So just more clarity on those issues. And then finally, since we're talking about transportation, I think to the extent that we can understand that creating new jobs, I think you said there were 500 jobs currently. So if the goal is to bring twice that or 3 times that many jobs, what does that mean in terms of our transportation needs? And not, and if we're going to build housing, you know, that also that means more people, and people have to get from their house to their job. So planning for that as much as we can ahead of time with investments in public transit and not, you know, figuring out how many more parking spaces we need for people's vehicles, I think is really critical.
Yeah, I have a few. Oh,
Go ahead.
sure. I have a few thoughts that are related and kind of jump in, so apologies in advance. I would like to see what options look like, I guess maybe from like case studies from other cities. What do transportation options look like where there are places where heavy industry is in close proximity to residential neighborhoods? Right, yeah, because I know it exists, right? Good and bad.
Especially micro.
Exactly, and I want to see, like, is it just protected bike lanes? Is it more harder infrastructure? Is it different color paint? Is it traffic? Like, what are the options? Because if we have this conversation about where a MARSEC zone can and cannot be, and if we have an opportunity to actually relocate spaces, right, with an eye towards not reinforcing harm, I think it's helpful to know, like, well, what are the options once we do that? And so that's kind of what my question was when I was like, well, can the truck route even go straight through, right? Because if it can and it's easy, then it does change what we can do on the residential side, the residential use, or rather, I guess, like the non-commercial use for getting around. And then is there an opportunity to think maybe a little bit beyond this site and thinking about the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal? I know in some other task force information, there's conversations about like the specific need for that cruise terminal, where it came from, what it can do versus what other assets can't do. But I'm curious to know if there's an opportunity to talk about how maybe it could be better aligned with the Manhattan Cruise Terminal. Like, is there an opportunity to condense more uses coming in and out, whether it's like at one site versus the other? Could that be a phased approach? And if it's phased, could you then share more commercial maritime uses when one of the cruise terminals is less active and not seeing boats, because there aren't boats at the cruise terminals every day. So I know it goes beyond the scope of the footprint of this project, but they are related. So I'm curious about that as well.
And just so I'm clear on the cruise terminal piece, because right at BCT, there's only 65 cruise calls a year currently. And so you're kind of raising this question of what if that was, where there wasn't a need for that, or expanding the need, like or looking at both?
I think it's both, right? Because I think I read that the Manhattan Cruise Terminal needs some upgrades, right? So there's got to be a phasing of that construction happening. There's got to be, I'm sure that both cruise terminals will then share who comes to call, right? If one of them is under construction. So like, are there opportunities to rethink that as that's happening, or condense the uses as well? And maybe it's like, maybe you're not bringing in lumber to a cruise terminal, but maybe you're bringing in bananas, and that's a different need, and it can, even if it's on off days.
I see, sort of usually in the cruise terminal, it's sort of more multifunctionally.
Yeah. And thinking about them as a pair rather than just like one and two different locations.
I have a question about site control. It's, you know, it's sort of like when you look at the map and you're looking, you know, sort of the furthest to the right or the furthest south, you know, where it seems like that division there feels like an arbitrary boundary, right? And
Which
I know it's
division?
not, or, the one furthest to the right, like the L
UPS site.
shape, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I know it's arbitrary because it's a site control issue, but it feels arbitrary in terms of like a geographic
Understood.
issue.
UPS or something?
That's the UPS site.
That's the UPS site, so.
Yeah, he's the expert on this.
Right, so I guess there's never, in like a perfect world, right? You know, this redevelopment, re-envisioning would go all the way
I see.
sort of down to that site. I'm supposing that that is, has there ever been any thought to some sort of renegotiation or putting that on the table? Because that then obviously opens up a ton of space for Red.
Yeah. Just to quickly answer to that, I know the city has been in conversation with UPS, and I know that the planning team is looking at adjacencies to the site, because that is a part of any good master planning process, is to see what sites exist, adjacent to the site. And so we may have more information on that as we move forward in the process.
Yeah, I mean, because it's interesting if there's sort of industrial shipping, warehousing, or whatever. If that UPS site sort of moved, sort of further into the middle, and then that site became available for more sort of housing or open space uses, that would, sort of essentially kind of solve the problem of like, are you going to have all the fun green stuff, up closer to Brooklyn Bridge Park, and all the industrial stuff like concentrated in Red Hook?
Well, and bringing it back to the multi-solving concept that I shared before, not only would it solve that problem, but it would avoid the whole vision of this project to fade by stopping at the largest of the last mile warehouses that we're proposing in the area to materializing. Because if you do all this project to reduce truck traffic in the area, and eventually you have a warehouse development that induces daily traffic. I'm not saying any industrial use, I'm saying that one specifically, which is what it was acquired for. You really have a failure of this whole project that's outside of the control of its goals and developments. So I agree with you profoundly.
No, thank you. Has that UPS warehouse even been built? Yeah,
No.
I feel like the last time I was down there, like they've saved that one historic brick wall, but that's the only thing, right?
Yeah, it's been vacant for 5 years. There are 2 buildings, but they are reduced to dust, and which we're breathing daily, probably. There's 2 piles of demolished buildings. That's all there is. Some bushes.
Hunter.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. I'll try to be quick. First is, so for instance, Maddie has the Fort Defiance proposal, which is for this UPS site. Yeah, thank you. And Brooklyn Greenway Initiative about 10 years ago was advancing a public space on Columbia Street that was fully designed, partially funded, and then sort of killed by New York City Parks. Sorry, Sarah, requiring a $5 million bathroom or something. And so my question is, and then I have another question after this, like at what point, like with kind of ideas that are currently in the mix for this community, such as the 2 I just mentioned, as well as many more, at what point do we sort of formally feed those into, like we can share those with everyone here, and I think would absolutely, like, they're not within the footprint of the BMT, but they're right next to it. So when can we insert those into this?
So I know the planning team and the project team has been looking at past plans and studies as a sort of starting off point. I think if there are specific ones, like the one you just named that you want to elevate, if you can share those directly with us, we can make sure that they get passed on. I think we want to have an awareness very early on, just as we move into anything more specific.
There's definitely kind of a where's our park sort of movement in the community, knowing that it was partially funded and nobody exactly knows where the money went.
That's to be remediated to some extent. Like I thought it was, and like didn't have the funding that, and Sarah would know better than I do, but my understanding was that it was never actually fully funded.
I think what happened, and we can get into this more, what I've heard, and definitely bears more investigation, is it's a DOT site. And I think we and RPA and other groups like led a community visioning process for it. I think Eric Adams, when he was borough president, put money into developing it as a public site that BGI, I think, was supposed to manage and operate. And then DOT's preference at that time was then to have it be built to New York City Parks standards, even though it's a little unclear to me what role Parks was going to take with it. And Parks was requiring a bathroom, which made it wildly over budget. That's my understanding.
Sarah, I see your hand up. I don't know if you wanted to.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Sarah.
Hi. It's okay. I can try to field this one. I actually don't know the details on this one, so I can find out for you guys. Myself, I'm actually really enthusiastic about a future park there, so that's sort of my personal hat. But I can find out whatever went on with that issue. It may have been before my time in this role, but lots to say. Can I say my two other things since you guys called on me and my hand was up?
Sure.
Okay. The first one is very easy. Remember years ago, there was a proposal for sort of like a streetcar that went along here. Did that completely go away?
No.
Does that still exist?
To clarify, there's the BQX, which was de Blasio's proposal.
Yeah.
There have been local proposals for a streetcar.
Okay. And are any of those still on the table? Or might
Not
this
to
be
my
an
knowledge.
opportunity, kind of like to Hunter's point of just like a list of things that have been community or, past proposals that may still have some legs, but I think that might be interesting just to think about what that would be like, or where.
The trolley team feel like not the one from the city, but the
local trolley.
Yes, they're
Yeah.
selected for it.
There is. Can you say that one more time? It's hard to hear.
Yeah, so there's a local group that supports a trolley along.
Got it.
That is still active, but our understanding
Yeah.
is that the EDC BQX proposal is no longer on the table.
Got it. Okay. I was just sort of interested in that one. Then the other question I have is broader, and for those of us who aren't maritime folks, but the question of shifting the MARSEC zone, for north or south, can you just describe what actually makes the MARSEC zone the MARSEC zone? I'm assuming it's fencing, there's probably surveillance cameras, like what's the kind of mechanism that creates that zone and how movable is it?
That's a great question. I think that's something we want to get more detail on, and I think the planning team can speak to it more directly. My basic understanding of the MARSEC zone is that it requires a certain security clearance for folks to move in and out of it. Excuse me. There's this whole set of federal regulations that determine how and permitting considerations to move it. I don't know the details of those. That's something that's been flagged several times as folks wanting more information on that process, and so we hope to get more information on that. But my understanding is that largely has to deal with international containers coming into the container terminal.
Right. Yeah. You don't want everyone having access to that, but I'm just kind of, is it a physical thing or is it a personnel centered process? And I guess that's where I'm not clear about, but thank you. I think having that on the list, and I will pledge here to find out a little bit more about that waterfront site if I can get a little bit more information about that for you all.
And on a related question, is anyone looking at whether the MARSEC zone needs to be as large as it is currently configured?
Yes.
Like, is that an assumption or is that something that's?
I believe it's because there was a customs house that was on one of the piers that has been deactivated. And so that's probably to your point, like why that designation is so large, because it didn't capture that. So I think depending on what the future needs are will probably determine the size. I don't think there's a standard size that it needs to be, but that's probably why it's so large.
Yeah, I think depending on the future land uses, the MARSEC zone could shift to realign with that potentially. But I want to let Hunter finish.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I'm not totally getting it, but I just want a better understanding of, so like master plan for the BMT site, that's what we're talking about. How much does the scope extend beyond the boundaries? So just to use two examples so I understand this, there are folks here who want a bus to Red Hook. That bus will not be going through the BMT. So if that's included in the recommendations going before the BMT, the GPP, et cetera, like, is that something that realistically would be supported? If we're suggesting improvements to existing New York City parks along the corridor that of course are adjacent or nearby. More money going into them. Like how does that factor into this process?
That's a great question. I mean, I think most critically, the master planning process is for the BMT site, which is shown here on the boundary, and having a site plan that will guide the development of that site over the next, let's say, 5, 15, 20 years. And EDC can speak to this, but I think there is an understanding that there may be other investments, whether capital investments or programmatic investments that need to be made that accompany any sort of master plan. And I think the city wants to acknowledge that and create space for those other investments. And so I think that's where something like the task force recommendations come into play. The city only has direct control over the site itself. Obviously, it's coordinating with its sister agencies on other needs. But so I think to me, it's a balance. It's having the master plan, then the preferred site plan for the site itself, but then also identifying potentially identifying those other needs that are outside.
Sure. But of course, the city has control over parks and DOT rights.
That is correct. I don't know if
Greenway.
EDC wants to add anything to that.
I think that covers it. I think especially for those sites that are adjacent to, we're, in conversations with our sister agencies about, obviously it touches like how we're going to coordinate, what are those implications in the process. In terms of the scope itself, it's in those boundaries, but obviously any recommendations on adjacent sites or how we think about broadly will be.
Yeah, it feels like, the Greenway is adjacent to this, so much, I think, of the scope of mobility and transportation is sort of exterior to the site. But yeah, just making sure I understand.
Yeah, I had a couple of things to add, some of which picked up on your comments. I think, one was such a general comment that encouraged the group to think about Governor's Island as a resource to the neighborhood and the site. Obviously, Brooklyn Bridge Park is right there and you can walk to it. And I get it's different than having to get on a ferry, but a lot of our visitors do come from this area, and we started running more regular ferry service every half hour in summer weekends to Red Hook during COVID. That's been really successful. And again, I think we have fare categories specifically for NYCHA residents. We're trying to do a lot of outreach to the community. So in terms of the open space conversation, definitely want to think about our ability to be a resource to the neighborhood and to improve those connections. I think also that's true from a jobs perspective as well. We have a lot of projects going on the island, like the New York Climate Exchange, where we're helping to grow jobs and do workforce training. And so if we're thinking about, again, providing accessible jobs to the community and other things and transportation access to those, think about that basket again as a way that we can be a resource to thinking about the big picture of things that are available in the immediate area of the site. I think relatedly, and this one I'll speak a little bit from personal experience for the guidelines. I often like to work by biking to Red Hook and then getting on the ferry to go to Governor's Island. I think we've talked a lot about the north-south connections on the Greenway, which I love as a regular cyclist, and the tunnel that goes to Manhattan. I think there's a lot of east-west challenges in the neighborhood also. I mean, I live in Windsor Terrace, and getting to the Red Hook ferry landing from there is very unpleasant, even though I do it many times a week.
And dangerous.
And dangerous, yeah. I mean, yes, Google tells you to take 9th Street, even though it's like a wiggle through a crosswalk, and then lots of the streets don't have good bike lanes and lots of trucks parked on the sidewalks, et cetera. So I think thinking about those, obviously from that personal perspective from the island, but also if we're trying to create destination parks, if we're trying to create more reasons why people are trying to get from the neighborhood to the waterfront, having safe, comfortable ways to do that from bikes or transit or pedestrians, I think is really important to think about in terms of just that lens. And then I think the last point I wanted to make, again, as a stakeholder that also has interest in some of the maritime uses, I think really thinking about, I know we're early in the process, but like a finer grain of what different versions of maritime uses look like and what those come with in terms of being able to co-locate with open space or not, having security requirements or not, having different truck implications or not, I think is really important, because international containers are a very different thing than ferry boats, are a very different thing than even these ideas of blue highway barges that don't have necessarily the same security concerns if they're not international cargo. And so I think, not expecting people to have answers to that today, but I think another sort of round of refinement on that would be really helpful to understand, again, I'll just use the example today, like our Manhattan ferry terminal, all of the deliveries that come to the island come through there, and 70% of our passengers also come through the same facility, right? And so they don't have to necessarily all be segregated. There's definitely improvements we can make on our terminal, but I think, again, just thinking about, there's a big spectrum of maritime uses, and some of them co-locate better than others with different types of uses. And so kind of, looking further at that. And I think relatedly, again, we definitely have an interest in thinking about ways to be smart about not just people, but also goods coming to the island from this location. But I think also thinking about where those sort of, it's a big site, where are the entry points that make sense for different, I think if we want to keep industrial uses, if we want to keep good movement, there are going to be some places where trucks and other vehicles are coming in and out of the site. Thinking about sort of like, what do those want to be next to? Where do you, again, all things I just think we should be thinking about. I'm not saying we need the answers to them today, but sort of how do you think about where things can co-locate, and if they can't, how are you thinking about creating buffers that make sense, or where those things are getting distributed throughout the site, to be smart about what works well for the uses and also what flows well through the neighborhood or through the BQE or whatever else next to it.
Thank you for that. Let's go to Kevin and then Kathy.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah, whoever mentioned that they bike on 9th Street, I don't know. But I think, in thinking about how we can really get people out of cars, and this sort of like builds off of what Sarah was mentioning earlier, where we need additional public transportation in the area. I think thinking about what are the bus routes or bus lines already there, and do we need additional ones? But I think one of the things that we should really investigate is, can we add bus lanes, dedicated bus lanes, going north and south, not only north and south, but also going east and west. Thinking about, okay, if there's going to be stuff that's being built there, we would love to have workers, being able to get there by public transportation. But for now and in the future. But yeah, having bus lanes that go north and south and east and west, given that, it is difficult, to get, across the borough. Yeah, that's all I'll add.
Thank you, Kevin. Kathy, yes.
Yeah, I also want to build on what Kevin and Hunter and Maddie were talking about. And I think many of the comments talked about connectivity and also beyond the actual site itself. And so thinking about the opportunities to integrate the BQE conversations into this process, because it is so clear that we can't talk about the site without bringing in the BQE component, and WXY also led that process, and DOT is here. So I think I would love to see in future meetings, like a more holistic conversation, like talking about the improvements that have already been announced for BQE South and what we're going to learn on BQE Central and the impacts, and also the Brooklyn bus network redesign is something that we learned recently will be announced at the end of next year, second half of next year, something like that. So how are we going to be a part of that larger conversation? So while the core work focuses on the site, I think expanding that footprint and focusing on the connectivity. You also brought, but Alex brought up about like traveling from other neighborhoods like Windsor Terrace and improving the bike lanes and the dedicated bus lane opportunities and pedestrian access and maintaining and expanding the greenway. I think just all of in the housing issue, what if we do build housing, how will people, get to work and get home? And so would love to see that bigger picture conversations brought into our agent meeting and elevated to the task force as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. After saying I was here to talk about the BQE, I had tried to avoid talking about the BQE because I talk so much about the BQE. But thank you, and Nancy, also you both raised it specifically. I do think that it's really critical to understand anything that is being recommended here in relationship to the BQE and vice versa. And I know maybe it feels premature because nobody has concrete suggestions are not on the table yet, but when it's appropriate to really make that connection, it's important to do so. You know, we've heard, I'm sure you could probably, you would be a very rich woman, maybe you already are, but you would be a richer woman if you knew, like, how many times people have said to you, why didn't they take into account the BQE when they were planning for Brooklyn Bridge Park? Like, you know, the amount of times that anyone, those of us who live in proximate to the park hear that, you know, you want to kind of throw yourself out the window. So let's not repeat that same mistake again.
On the connectivity front, you know, I was wondering if there's been any talk or any speculation in any of the groups about, say, if you looked at the AECOM plan from 2017 and one of its, you know, kind of out of the box solutions, right, was the extension of the number 1 train coming into Red Hook. And is that part of, you know, and that's a big lift, obviously. Is that part of anyone's dreams or musings or hopes or analysis?
It's definitely been raised. Again, looking at past plans and proposals for the site, I think given if you look to other subway expansions and the timeline and the cost associated with them, I feel like there's not a lot of confidence that to sort of plan on that, especially if we think about solutions in the near term. And also the MTA obviously facing a lot of financial challenges. And so it's definitely something that's been discussed, but you know, will it be sort of like a core part of any transportation solution? I feel like no, probably not. I don't know if the city wants to share.
No, that's correct. I think we're looking at things that are achievable and scalable, whether it's ferries or buses and things like that, versus something that, you know, may never come into fruition, just given the scale or the proposed densities that may or may not be on the site.
Within this transportation part of the conversation, I want to make sure that I mention a couple of things that I've both heard and have been part of discussing as opportunities. One that came up on a thread, on an email thread, was the potential conflict of more commercial use for the recreational bike lanes that are in place. So understanding the capacity of existing bike lanes to support increased cargo deliveries, which I'm a strong advocate for. So that's one area of conflict to keep an eye on. And the other one, which is really obvious when you look at a couple of the maps that we've been looking at, when you put them together, which is the overlap of bicycle routes and truck routes. And with the current truck redesign plus the bus network redesign plus the not completed yet Brooklyn Greenway development within the area of Red Hook, I think it's a great opportunity to, it's a segregation in a positive way in this sense, and not put people in harm's way, basically. In a bit of a future-looking way, though, I want to mention something that's so far been unaddressed by the truck route redesign process and the European Coastal Resiliency Project as well, which is the Halleck Street route. This is something that has been in discussion and conversation in Red Hook for a long time, even before the truck route redesign process started. And that's the possibility of running a truck route through a street that was demapped and is currently going through parkland. That coincides with part of USHAT's, U.S. Army Corps of Engineer project for a flood wall. So that could potentially be part of grain infrastructure that's done there along with grain infrastructure. But just keeping kind of a guiding star on bike lanes shouldn't coincide with truck routes, I think is at least a mistake not to repeat, and at best something that's addressed through the project.
And just to clarify, when you're talking about the truck route redesign, you're talking about the Red Hook traffic study in particular, or a separate redesign?
There's a separate process that goes through
Got it. Yeah.
rulemaking.
Got it.
And so there was like a kind of engagement process and people giving feedback online. And then what happens is I think we're supposed to put out a report, and then there's a rulemaking process where people can further opine on what's being proposed.
Thank you.
I have two more questions if I don't know. So first question is, this is partially a question for Tiffany and for WXY. With so much offshore wind infrastructure being discussed for the Brooklyn waterfront, I'm curious if you feel like offshore wind is represented in this process. So we have been talking to offshore wind companies, like it's all speculative right now. And, they're talking about their like on land routes. I'm not an expert on this, but of course, we're concerned or partially concerned, also interested if there are opportunities to improve the greenway, if there is offshore wind lines going through the streets of Brooklyn. And I have also said to them, the BMT site seems like a little bit of a blank slate from my standpoint. Now I get the Marsex part of it, but could offshore wind infrastructure, their line to go up to Vinegar Hill and the Con Ed site, is that being represented in some of this planning process as something in the future?
That's something I'll have to take back to the planning team. We haven't discussed it a lot in detail yet. So yeah, I'd have to come back.
Cool. It just seems like I don't know if I know you all are doing a lot.
No, nothing that I can speak to. But no, and I would agree as part of the task force, we haven't really talked about it. Just the recognition of the fact that that site is being built out for it, but not direct conversation.
Cool. Yeah. And then my second thing is, I'm going to put you on the spot. So as we're thinking about resources to share, like the foreign compliance plan and other things, do you all have a recent park evaluation or open space evaluation of Red Hook that possibly we could get solved?
As well as this thing we would have reserved profiles for 2021.
Okay.
But we might also have some older Brooklyn Red Hook specific neighborhood specific evaluations.
Great.
That kind of look at the quality of parks and space,
nice.
Also the quantity. Definitely the 2021 open space profiles would look at the quantity and access that people have in Red Hook to parks and open spaces. But I'd have to look at it more closely.
Yeah, I think that's obviously.
Yeah, and your question is clearly rooted in trying to understand what is the access currently for residents in Red Hook.
What's there?
Yeah.
Understood.
Chris, if I could just for a second, I just want to allocate a couple of minutes for anyone who hasn't spoken yet, especially folks online. I know many of us are just listening in and just trying to absorb, and I respect that, but there are quite a few of us here. And so if there's anyone that hasn't really had a chance to speak, if they want to share a thought or a question. No? Okay. Carry on.
I have a question that I'd like to ask. I guess some folks have touched on it, but I guess like one of the more sort of when people want to, I guess, talking about housing potentially on the site is like, people have a lot of different reactions to, and I think it relates to thinking about financial sustainability for the site, which is a core goal of the city. And so I guess it's sort of a bigger open-ended question, but like when we think about mobility in particular and housing on the site, like what are the things that come up for people as sort of like key concerns or like considerations? I know it's hard to respond to without sort of like anything specific on the table, but that, the city's been very clear that they want to look at the potential of housing on this site. And obviously transportation is a key challenge already in the community into this area. So I'm just wondering what that raises for folks when they hear that. Yeah.
Just an initial reaction is it's hard to visualize housing on site that is so flood prone, just based on the image you showed earlier. So, yeah, that seems scary.
The main concern is resiliency and flood protection.
Yeah.
Understood.
My concern, which is not an original thought, somebody brought up in a task force meeting, was the feeling like this, because the site is so large, that there's an opportunity to solve more of the city's general housing scarcity with this site, and just making sure that that was not what the plan was for here. And I thought that was a fair point. Really meaning that there is direct need in the neighborhood that already exists. There's very large public housing infrastructure that has its own challenges that already exist. And so if there could still be a way to pay attention to what's happening here, for trying to use the site as another way to, I don't want to say burden because that's too negative, but as another way to try and solve this much larger problem that we have. And then I guess just practically looking at, thinking, actually, Lara, your point earlier about not concentrating or perpetuating harm is really resonating with me, because we're still limited by just like physics, right? There's portions of the site that cannot support big uses. So it actually just limits what can go there, and then that forces decisions to happen elsewhere. So how do you balance all of that? I have like some notes here about thinking like, could we put stuff on top of things, like on rooftops, like maybe the open space it's not ground level, maybe it's on top of something, and then that opens up an opportunity. But I think like the physical constraint of something like that, and trying to balance that with the need for housing, it seems like a very real challenge.
And just to clarify your point on housing, not like this site not solving the city, like I feel like you're elevating this point of like the housing should address sort of local need, should speak to local need, even though it sort of fits within a larger strategy to address the housing affordability crisis.
I think so. And I think it's also because a lot of the commercial activity is actually already serving the larger part of the city, right? So why would you also then force the housing need to serve the larger part of the city? Like, that's not really equitable. So just like thinking about that.
Understood. Thank you. Happy to see your hand. Yeah.
So definitely making any housing there truly affordable, but also not having parking minimums as part of it. So as to not add traffic, but prioritizing walking bike foot transit, connecting to the other neighborhoods and
Yeah, I mean, point taken, certainly about not wanting to, like, the site can't solve all the problems of the city. It can't, even the goal list is like wonderful, admirable goals, but we probably can't, make significant progress on each one of those here. But in principle, I don't have any opposition to including housing in the mix of uses for the site. Affordable housing, certainly. But if there's also an opportunity to build housing that contributes to the financial sustainability of the site, I don't necessarily think that's a problem either, just on the face of it, theoretically. I also wonder if there are other non-maritime but still commercial uses that would, like a hotel, for example, that would add to the financial sustainability of the site, whether those things are being considered. And how, because I don't know how realistic it is for the maritime use solely to create a super economically vibrant site. Maybe it is, maybe that's enough, but if not, what other ways can we make the site profitable that can help support, the non-profitable uses?
Yeah.
I mean, I would certainly say from the Brooklyn Ridge Park Conservancy perspective, right, which, went through many years of conversations around kind of housing to support open space and, with folks on different sides of those issues. From my perspective, and I think the community would be in alignment with this, but obviously that's an assumption, is that the housing that was incorporated within Brooklyn Ridge Park to help maintain the site has been successful, has not met, I think, people's fears of privatizing the open space. That was, I think, sort of one of the big fears that people had with housing came in, is that it would start to feel that the open space, the parkland would feel privatized. And I don't think that has been the case at all. So I think from our perspective, if housing is done thoughtfully, there's thoughtful inclusion of affordable housing, but also thoughtful inclusion of housing that can pay bills, then you can have a site that is financially self-sustainable, I think, in a very vibrant kind of way.
I would imagine, as I mentioned earlier, that there's a lot of constraints to start the conversation of where housing makes sense, along with what housing makes sense. I know that within Red Hook, there's an understandably strong protectiveness of industrial waterfront uses, because that's in scarcity. And actually industries that make use of the waterfront, which is not what's happening with a lot of waterfront properties. So good use of waterfront industrial uses. And might seem a bit so like banal, how do you say, like superficial, by protecting the light, the sky, the low rise nature of Red Hook is something that people feel very strongly. I'm part of those people. So I think from my perspective, when hearing the conversation about housing, in order to offer a comment, I would like to hear more of what and where. Sure. It's 128%. There's maybe 5 in which this is a terrible idea, and 5 which it makes sense.
Yeah, understood.
I have one last question. Are there plans for the city to force future tenants to use the waterfront on this piece of land?
That's a good question. I mean, my understanding, and EDC can chime in, is that they want to prioritize the waterfront for maritime uses. And so I think that as part of this master planning process is to, like, as part of that master plan, to reinforce that idea. I think right now the city sees a missed opportunity to have a lot of non-maritime uses on piers, for example. And so I think that is a focus of the city moving forward. Force, I don't know, but yeah, but definitely encourage strongly. Yeah. Okay, I think we've just got a few minutes left, so we'll move to next steps. Okay, great. Just to wrap here, thank you all for such good contributions and discussion. So just to be aware, I think we'll have our next meeting either mid-December or early January, TBD. We'll definitely want to follow up and get that settled and get a date out so you all can have it on your calendars. I think by that time, we hope to have more specific sort of spatial planning information for you all to respond to. We want to make sure that the next time we pull you all together, there's something substantive to be looking at. So stay tuned on that. We are working on an engagement summary that should be coming out relatively soon, which will capture all the engagement to date. And we'll be announcing the sort of second set of public workshops, hopefully within the next couple of days. So we ask that you share that out. And then we are, as I said, we don't feel like the engagement we've done today is fully representative of the surrounding community. So we've organized sort of site tours and focus groups with the tenant associations at Red Hook Houses. We're exploring some collaboration with the RHI to bring sort of youth and non-English speaking communities into the fold as well. And that will just continue to be a focus of ours moving forward. So just want you all to be aware of that.
Will you share those opportunities with the group? I think it's great for us to
you know,
kind of glom onto your efforts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great that you're doing that outreach. I think I certainly can learn from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't promise I can be there.
That's okay. We will definitely share all the
great. Thanks.
And then these slides, these were slightly different, I think, than the materials we got, or?
These aren't in the pre-read, yeah.
Yeah, they're not the pre-read. So we will share this deck as well in the SharePoint.
Okay, great.
This is sort of a summation of a lot of that information.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think a lot of you brought up some really good points about documents that you have or plans. If you want to share those with me, I can put them on our shared drive, but also any afterthoughts that you have about the conversation with Tiffany and Chris and I.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think that concludes our first meeting. Thanks. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you. Have a good one.
as well